Nothing seems more natural than nature. Landscape, we like to think, has no religion. But would Spain look as it does here in Andalusia if these fields had not first been irrigated under the aegis of Allah and then left dusty by their Catholic conquerors? Semana Santa in Sevilla. These marches are a mixture of arrogant penitence and shuffling triumphalism. What could be more threateningly humble than Spanish Catholicism? Spaniards often boast of the Christian purity of their blood, but they know how much their glory owes to the mixed blood they deny. Celebration and menace go together in Holy Week. The marchers make themselves tall and more or less anonymous in the unnerving uniforms of the Holy Inquisition. Their hooded costumes remind us of the Ku Klux Klan, who, in the southern United States, don them to terrorize blacks, Jews, and Catholics. Man is both inventive and repetitious when he comes to parade his pieties and his malevolence.
I'm now standing on the same bridge that I was looking down at about 5 hours ago, and these are the same people driven with the same kind of energy that they were driven with then. I'm flagging, but they're not. And I suppose the reason has to be that something or other in them makes them believe that what they're doing is valid. And that same thing makes me feel quite alarmed.
These people are actually celebrating one of the most intolerant, vindictive, and self-righteous organizations that you could imagine in 100 nightmares. If God really inhabited them in the way that they believe he inhabited their ancestors, I suppose I would be pretending to be a Christian, or running for my life, or being burnt at the stake. The Alhambra in Granada, one of the great capital cities of Spanish Islam. Government offices, fortress, pleasure dome, the palace was built, so they say, by a Jew. When the last of the Nasrid sultans was forced out of his beloved Court of the Lions in 1492, Spanish imperialism stamped its conquering mark on the plaster. If you've got it, flaunt it. The slogan of all arrivistes. In this newly acquired palace, Ferdinand and Isabella received Columbus and commissioned him to discover a new world and acquire a new Spain. One conquest led eventually to another. Man and his God have similar greeds.
I don't know what the lure of the Alhambra is exactly. It's a great piece of crusading loot, of course, taken by the Christians from the Moors, and I suppose that the people who come here see it as some kind of proof of the superiority of Christianity, or maybe the superiority of Islam. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what I think myself, actually. I've been here about 10 times in my life, and I'm sure I shall come back, and sometimes I'm the Sultan, but I'm rarely a crusader. Often some kind of Jew, I suppose. Whatever it is, it has this kind of place of pilgrimage lure to it, and I guess more people come here now than ever came in its great days. Odd.
In Moorish Granada, Jews, Christians, and Muslims are said to have cohabited in harmony, the so-called conviviencia, the living together. Just how harmonious it really was is open to question. There's no such debate about the state of interfaith relations in modern Córdoba. This was once Corduba, a great Roman city. It's been built, rebuilt, and especially overbuilt. A Visigothic church replaced the Roman temple, then a great mosque, the church, and then, finally perhaps, a Christian cathedral swamped and partially digested the mosque. Catholicism is not wholly at ease here. It asserts itself too insistently, almost ludicrously, in what is only too obviously and beautifully a mosque, even if Muslims are forbidden to pray here. Jews with television cameras, it soon transpires, may walk, but not talk. The security men are more like insecurity men, on the watch not for thieves, but for the rightful owners of the place. Symbols of the clash of faiths and architectural styles abound. The mihrab, the Muslim preacher's pulpit, is chained off. Allah, you might say, has become the god in the iron mask. UNESCO has reproached the Vatican for its vandalizing Christianization of the place, but the thought police told us that we were not allowed to mention such things in the mosque, in the cathedral, I should say.
Well, the guides can talk, and I suppose the word of God can be heard for those who have ears for it, and the stones speak, but I, in principle, don't, because I'm forbidden to do so. So I suppose, apart from mutter mutter, I'd better say no more.
Andalusians have eradicated their origins, but the old roots are bearing improbable new fruit. Abdurrahman Jimenez, from a Christian family with Jewish elements, is one of several new conversions, or should we say reversions, to Islam.
You have here in Córdoba one of the great monuments of struggle between the great religions in the mezquita. Are you ever tempted to go in there and pray?
Well, in fact, we cannot enter to pray in this mosque. It's a symbol of our past, you know, and it's a very important monument, you know. But we cannot pray there. I don't know why.
What happened in your vision of life that made you believe that Allah was the one God that you wish to honor, as opposed to the Christian God? Is he a different God or the same God in a different light?
Well, it's a very complicated question, you know. In fact, you know, the Muslim people, we believe that, you know, the three main religions have the same origins, you know. The three, they believe in God, but which are the difference, you know? Muslim people, they believe in the Tawhid. The Tawhid is the unification of God. We say that the God is one.
But so do the Jews, do they not?
Yeah. Also, but the Christian people, especially Catholic people, they speak about the Trinity, you
Yes.
know? And this is, for us, more complicated, you know? And also, when the Christian people feeling or thinking God, they make a lot of corporations.
They put like, bodies to
They put the bodies
God,
and God,
yes.
and this is very strange for the Muslim mentality. The difference between Islam and other religions for us is that Islam is the last religion, you know, and it's more fresh.
Jews played their part in Cordoba's past glory. The great Rabbi Maimonides has a hotel named after him. But in the little synagogue where he worshipped, Jews may no longer pray.
Voila. Little synagogue in Córdoba is one of the places I remember very well because I came here about 43 years ago first. And there was an old boy here, and he was the guide. He had one tooth, and he said, Antigua Sinagoga Hebraica, Monumento Nacional. And this is all there is, the old Jewish synagogue, a national monument. Simple little place with a sort of harem for the women upstairs. A lovely contrast with the ornateness of the Catholic faith.
The Moorish motif is no surprise in a time where Arabic was the language of art and science. Catholicism triumphed in Spain. It expelled both Islam and Judaism. But there is one great Mediterranean religion which it's been forced to accommodate. Live and let die is the motto of the bullfight. Blood and sand now draw bigger and more fervent congregations to the Plazas de Toros than most churches. One of the high priests of tauromaquia is Pedro Romero de Solis.
Los católicos consideramos que el acto religioso más importante, que es la misa, es la Sagrada Misa, donde se celebra y se conmemora la muerte de Cristo. En el momento de la consagración se separa la hostia, que es pan, que es carne, del vino, que es la sangre. Sí. Y la separación de la carne y de la sangre es justamente el símbolo de la muerte.
En la tauromaquia.
En la tauromaquia exactamente igual. Nosotros no comprendemos la tauromaquia sin matar. La tauromaquia reclama la muerte porque es un sacrificio.
¿Y la gente esperan la muerte del torero o no?
Realmente yo creo que el sacrificio, la base y la estructura profunda del sacrificio siempre es la muerte de un hombre. Todo sacrificio se está montado sobre el derramamiento de sangre, que es lo que fertiliza y fecunda la vida y la relación entre todos nosotros. El toro es una religión sacrificial. La religión cristiana es una religión sacrificial. La religión judía es una religión sacrificial. Todos tenemos en común el sacrificio. La sangre es el símbolo de la vida.
In the city of Cádiz, Providence furnished a Mediterranean kingdom with an Atlantic harbour from which to sail to a new world. You get a panoramic impression from the Cámara Obscura, part of the touristic charm of what is now just another Spanish port.
Now we are going to see the port, okay? Here.
On August the 2nd, 1492, Cádiz was full of departing ships, crammed with the last 8,000 Spanish Jews, holding one-way tickets for an unknown destination. Columbus and his crew, which contained several Jewish sailors, were forced to sail from the little port of Palos, further up the coast. The name means literally the sticks. They couldn't sail until the Inquisition had seen the last Jew over the horizon, and waited for August the 3rd to dawn, on their knees, in the Church of St. George.
It's not easy to imagine the Thursday night in the August of 1492 when this church was filled with all the greatest dignitaries of Spain, including, of course, the Catholic kings, Ferdinand and Isabella. They went together from here, you might say, from this harbour, with Christopher Columbus to discover America, gold, and souls for the church to save. Only a few years earlier, a Genoese adventurer like Columbus might have expected to make his fortune to the east, but Byzantium had been captured by the Turks, and the whole of the eastern Mediterranean was closed off to Christianity. And so the whole enterprise was turned westwards. The sea has left this place, but something of the air of hope and discovery still remain here. Columbus, of course, discovered America, that's one thing. But America also discovered Columbus and his consequences, which was another.
He never found the gold he sought, but at least Christopher Columbus has his statue amidst the traffic of Mexico City. There is no monument to his successor, Hernán Cortés, who made Mexico Catholic with gunpowder, steel, and chickenpox. This isn't the airport, but a moving walkway at the shrine of the Virgin of Guadalupe, the Indian Madonna, whose miraculous image appeared on the Cape of Don Diego, one of the Spanish friars who came to conquer the New World, theologically. There was no shortage of gods in ancient Mexico. Even today, just who was and wasn't in the pantheon causes some confusion. The statues of the last Aztec emperor but one.
Este tipo es qui?
Huitláhuac. Huitláhuac.
¿Huitláhuac? ¿Quién era?
Dios del agua.
Dios del agua. Bueno, ¿Usted cree a este Dios?
Sí.
¿Estos dioses viven ahora en México o no?
No, eran ya miles de años, hace miles de años, otra vez, de eso de, ¿qué será? Antes de Cristo, ¿verdad?
No, después de Cristo.
The great church of the Virgin of Guadalupe is a rallying point for Mexicans. Like so many symbols, it has a double meaning. It proves that Catholicism subjugated Mexico and that Mexico has subjugated Catholicism, converting its trinity to become Mexico's own unique divinity, or divinities. The Zocalo in Mexico City was once the Aztec temple precinct. It was filled with trees until 1968, when students used them for barricades. They were massacred, just as the Aztecs had been. Mexico is built on skulls. The capital stands on the skeleton of Tenochtitlan. When the conquistadors arrived in 1520, they found a city with more people than London, more canals than Venice, and more pyramids than Egypt.
It's part of the myth that the Spaniards were very eager to believe that they brought civilization to Mexico. But civilization means what goes on in cities. And this city of Tenochtitlan, all of which has disappeared except for this maquette that the pigeons strut on, just as the Spaniards strutted through its streets. That city was much bigger than any city that the Spaniards had ever seen, and it totally amazed them. So in a sense, you could say that the pre-Columbian Mexicans were more civilized than the Spaniards who conquered them. It's a sad commentary on European civilization that all they could think to do with it was to smash it up.
The Aztecs may have been more civilized or more cruel than their conquerors. They were certainly more godly. Enrique Florescano knows their gods well.
Su gran dios Quetzalcoatl es un dios del maíz, es un dios que encarna el proceso de la agricultura. Él muere en el otoño y luego es enterrado en principios de la primavera y renace en el verano. O sea que él es un espejo del proceso agrícola, de la muerte y el renacimiento de la vida, del ciclo continuo de la naturaleza. Y los mexicanos antiguos no adoraban, no tenían la idea de la muerte que tenemos los occidentales. Ellos pensaban que era un ciclo continuo de perecimiento, declinación y renacimiento y vida.
En cierto sentido, si pregunta siempre si eran algunos aztecas que no creían en sus dioses. Ahora en el occidente hay mucha gente que no creen. ¿Era posible de no creer?
No. No. En una sociedad como la sociedad mesoamericana, la maya, la azteca, la zapoteca, no, porque desde que nacía el niño estaba encerrado en un círculo comunitario que le enseñaban que la vida no tiene razón más que como proyecto de la comunidad. No hay una vida individual, no hay la idea occidental de la realización de la existencia personal. Eso no existe en la cultura mesoamericana. Nunca existió. Entonces, desde el principio, los niños tenían una idea comunitaria, una idea, una socialización total. Y esa socialización les enseñaba que ellos eran solamente una parte del conjunto y que la realización individual tenía sentido para la comunidad.
Tula isn't the most exciting pre-Columbian site, but it is a crucial one. Though it was never theirs, Aztecs, whether ancient or modern, could not, cannot leave it alone.
These huge warriors were not Aztecs, they were Toltecs. And they were in fact warriors who, for a while, dominated this site and built this city, but were eventually defeated and crushed. The Aztecs wanted to believe that they had taken on their magic. They wanted to believe it very badly, but somehow they didn't quite believe that they had. So every now and again, the Aztec emperor would send a messenger all the way from Teotihuacan, a pretty long journey, about 100 kilometers, in order to discover from the old ladies who lived still on this site of Tula whether or not he'd been doing a good job and whether the Aztecs, who'd built an enormous city, very much greater than Tula and much more impressive, had at last earned the respect of the Toltecs who still lived here. And the comedy of it is that however often they sent these messengers and whatever gifts they brought, whatever images they brought of the work they had done, and they were very good painters, the old ladies never ever gave them a good notice. So every time they traipsed back and told the emperor that it really wouldn't do. And for some reason, although he was not exactly delighted by criticism, he seemed always to have listened ruefully to this and tried to do better. Coming away from Tula, you sort of find yourself thinking how gods and civilizations have in common an extraordinary capacity for swallowing and a relatively limited capacity for digesting. So there's always a kind of burp of apprehension on the part of the dominant culture when it tastes again the flavor of what it's swallowed. And at that point it can do two things. It can either acknowledge the flavor or try to repress it. In fact, most cultures try to have it both ways. For instance, the Roman Catholic Church swallowed the Roman gods just as it swallowed the Mexican gods. And in a way it pretended that they had all been false and got rid of, but they also used them to make saints and to enjoy the habits of worship that the people had had before the Christian God came along. I suppose the truth is religions and cultures subscribe to the old rule of dog eat dog. And if you reverse dog, you get God, and God eats God.
Quetzalcoatl, the peace-loving god-king of Tula, was conquered, so the legend says, by force of alcohol. Tezcatlipoca, the bloodthirsty god that the Aztecs took to their hearts, filled him with fermented cactus juice, or pulque. He drank himself into obscurity, slept with his sister, and fled in shame across the sea. The mariachis sing this song about a king who loses everything but remains a king. The legends said that Quetzalcoatl would one day return as a messiah, bearded and blanched in a fresh white skin, like Hernán Cortés. When the Spaniard arrived, the Aztec emperor Moctezuma II thought his time was up. Professor Alfredo López Austin says there was surprise on both sides.
¿Cómo han visto los españoles los aztecos y los aztecos los españoles?
Bueno, la sorpresa fue sumamente grande porque los españoles tenían una idea de lo que era el mundo que ellos llamaban infiel, pagano, pero esta fue una realidad para ellos totalmente distinta. Se encontraron con un mundo en el que incluso los dioses les parecieron que existían, pero ellos calificaron como demonios. Para los indígenas fue también una cosa muy extraña ver a hombres que tenían un color distinto, que traían caballos, son venados enormes sin cuernos, que tenían una tecnología desarrollada, muy desarrollada, sobre todo la pólvora y el hierro, y eso provocó en ellos un sentimiento de que estaban tratando con dioses, o cuando menos con representantes de un dios muy poderoso que se había ido, Quetzalcoatl, y que ahora regresaba con un mensaje nuevo. Eso no se puede generalizar. pero evidentemente muchos creyeron que los españoles eran hijos de Quetzalcoatl.
To my mind, the greatest civilization of old Mexico was not Aztec, but Mayan. Chichen Itza is only one of their superb cities.
The Greek philosopher Heraclitus once said that war was the father of all things. Not really a particularly popular view, particularly in those who suppose that Jesus, for instance, was the Prince of Peace. But there was also the case, wasn't there, of onward Christian soldiers. So there's a kind of balance in religion between the peaceful and the warlike. And as far as the Mayans were concerned, the warlike predominated completely. This elegant palace is actually devoted to the warriors. And this is the sacrificial stone which the warriors were devoted to procuring hearts for. The Mayans sacrificed a large number of their prisoners. They didn't do it in quite the same horrifyingly programmatic way as the Aztecs. There was a kind of balance in the Mayans which was completely lost by the Aztecs. But you can't hide from yourself the fact that they too were devoted to blood.
If the Aztecs were Mexico's Romans, the Maya were the Greeks. They had music, art, and science, but no theater. Instead, they had the ball game. 9 forms of the pre-Columbian game survive, but only just. Much of the flavor of the ancient sport has been lost, as has the practice of sacrificing key players at full time. Rural matches such as this one entice anthropologists away from the metropolis.
The players are practically undressed, and they have a deerskin girdle, but the most important part is the leather strap that goes right under their buttocks, because that prevents them from getting a hernia from the muscles and the tendons just ripping open. Part of the time the ball is going flying up and they're hitting it hip to hip, and part of the time it's on the ground. And I find that they get very excited about being on the ground. And what they tell me is that when it's on the ground, the game really can go on.
There was a famous English football manager called Bill Shankly, and he once said that football was not a matter of life and death. It was much more important than that. I have a feeling that the ball game has something in common with Shankly's view of things. Is that right?
Totally. It's the basis of the creation myths, at least among the Maya. It's a cosmic relationship between the living who return, revive through the process of fertility, dying, and being reborn through the new generations, and the gods. And that is a cosmic relationship, and it has to do with the creation myths.
The gods also played the ball game, didn't they?
Yes, there's this wonderful reference to the Citlal Tlachtli. Citlal is the stars, Tlachtli, the ritual court of the stars, where the gods are going to play out. The human passions are also projected onto the gods, the way that man needs them to bring the rain, to make sure that the world lives on.
Is it true that on certain occasions the winning team was sacrificed? Can you supply a logic for that of some kind?
Well, it's an honor. It's an honor. In other words, you've won, and it is an honor to be sacrificed because it is your blood that is going to be, you're going to be decapitated. Your blood is going to be strewn on the court, and it is this blood that is going to fertilize. It is going to fertilize the world and help the cycle to continue.
The Great Pyramids of Chichen Itza, remarkable, sublime, give them whatever adjectives you like. They were also the site of sacrifices. Bodies were thrown down these steep steps. Some of humanity's most beautiful buildings were erected for inhumane purposes. Those who built great cities often had pious blood on their hands. My heart may have been in my mouth after climbing up, but at least the tourist isn't greeted by God's servants, armed with knives.
We're quite used to thanking God, but we're not much in the way of blaming gods. The Mayans were, I suppose, lucky with their gods because it procured them this great site and the energy to develop it in the way that they did. They were also very unlucky. In the middle of the last century, the Mayans, who had never really been conquered by the Spaniards as the Aztecs had been, revolted against the central power. It wasn't the Spaniards anymore, but it was their descendants, and they were at least as cruel to the Mayans as the Spaniards had been, and largely enslaved them in their huge estates. So they rebelled, the Mayans, and for a while they had the best of it. And it looked as though the old warrior tradition would finally procure their freedom again. But their god let them down. He let them down because he was the maize god. And when the moment came, the maize began to grow, and the Mayans gave up their fight and ran away. Not because they were defeated, not because they were frightened, but because the crop had to be gathered.
October the 4th, and the mountain village of Quetzalcoatl is filled to capacity for the festival of San Francisco. Peasants come in and occupy the village, which is normally very middle class. They first prove their Christian piety in the very European-style church. The devotions over, they don the old costumes and dance with the old spirit. One set of dancers skip and prance to revive the cosmos and keep the stars in their places, while others dance out a story that is 4 centuries old. By their masquerade, these performers mock their conquerors, as well as lampooning their mounted grandeur. Comedy is often the revenge of the underdog.
This is the enactment of the conquest of Mexico by the Spaniards, by the Indians whom they conquered. You can pick out the Spaniards because they've got crosses and swords. Both of them were used to crush the resistance of the local people.
The mask, so important in Mexican tradition, hides and liberates. The decoration of Ruth Lechuga's flat testifies to her position as the leading authority on the subject.
The masks are used mainly in dances. Some ceremonies, like Eastern ceremonies. The Jews, again, in Eastern ceremonies, are masked because they are the bad ones. They are the ones who killed Jesus Christ. But in other things, they are just dances with many different themes.
They are always directed towards the Catholic God and the Virgin.
Well, yes, Mexico is on the surface a Catholic country, and there are very few Indian groups which are not even superficially Catholic, but the Catholicism is something very movable. They still believe in the sun and the moon and the earth and the water and the fire.
Is sacrifice still a part of what the Indians do in their religion and call it Christianity or not?
Well, there are certain sacrifices of animals in some places. But mostly the sacrifice is in the dance itself. If you dance the whole day under the bright sunshine with a very heavy costume and a mask over the face, it's a sacrifice.
Here you are in your bedroom, Ruth, and I see that you sleep with death, so to speak. As you know, in Greek mythology, death and sleep were closely related. You're not afraid to sleep with death?
No, because those masks came to stay here mainly because they're mainly white, and it contrasts very well with the color of the wall.
The highlight of the day is very high indeed. After a suspenseful period of prayers and chanting, the veladores, flying men, boost themselves from their launch pad and become stars in their airy field.
I guess these are really the first spacemen, because they represent the celestial bodies as they fly around, and they're completely pre-Christian, pre-Columbian.
The more daring Indians did not and do not wait for death before ascending to heaven. The Franciscans and the Dominicans competed with the Indians and each other in creating places of worship. Both Christian fraternities stole from existing monuments and recycled them as fortresses of the faith. One such is the Church of the Shrine of Our Lord of Chalmer, that draws 3 million pilgrims a year, many of whom finish the journey not on foot, but shufflingly on their knees. The faithful come to celebrate a supposed miracle which took place in a nearby grotto. The priest who led me there is himself evidence of another kind of miracle. He's Aztec by origin and Catholic by vocation.
Vascuence,
Sí.
Ibarra,
Pues,
Cañada, la Cañada. El otro apellido es Carrillo, también es español.
sí.
Por tanto, pues aprecio mucho mi sangre en lo que tengo de español y aprecio mucho la sangre de mi raza azteca.
Bueno.
Soy el mestizaje de ambas. No sabemos exactamente el tiempo, el año en que los indígenas hayan empezado a adorar aquí a una estatua, a un ídolo. Lo que sí sabemos con certeza es que en 1539, cuando los padres agustinos vinieron de Ocuilan, Malinalco, a visitar estas tierras con el fin de evangelizar a la gente que acudía aquí, pues se dieron cuenta que ya aquí había un culto. Ellos pensaron poner una cruz aquí para, en relación con la cruz, hablarles del misterio de Cristo. Por tradición, porque de esto no habrá pruebas nunca, por tradición de boca en boca y de familia en familia, se ha venido transmitiendo la noticia, la noción de que había aparecido aquí el Cristo en la cruz sin que lo trajera nadie. Que eso lo crea usted o lo crea yo, bueno, eso se queda ya a cada quien.
Si un peregrino pregunta a usted la misma pregunta, ¿qué ha pasado veramente en la cueva? ¿Qué diría usted?
Al peregrino le digo yo, si tú crees que él se apareció milagrosamente, pues síguelo creyendo. Pero yo no lo creo.
Ah, bueno. La aparición de la imagen del Virgen, su vestido de Don Diego, ¿usted piensa que la misma cosa es verdad?
Bueno, yo entiendo que ha habido muchos estudios. Y ahí, aunque no es dogma de fe, ahí sí está uno tentado a creer una aparición en el lienzo, en la tela aquella del ayate de Juan Diego.
Sí.
Porque cuando el Papa no ha dicho tienen que creer porque anatema sit,
bueno,
no ha dicho nada.
No.
Entonces, pero sí sería un tanto peligroso pues para un cristiano católico. Estamos hablando de la Virgen de Guadalupe,
sí,
¿no?
Sí.
Pues ponerse en contra de lo que tanto se ha demostrado ya, porque se han hecho estudios.
Sí.
Aquí no se ha hecho estudio ninguno.
Very good answer.
The friars converted Mexico, on the surface. Under the crust, old beliefs and rituals lived on, and still do. In San Pablito dwells a white witch famous for her efficiency. Our driver had been suffering from gout in his accelerating and occasionally braking foot. The local medical expert explained that the problem had been diagnosed as the fault of evil spirits. They must be driven out.
Now she's going to give a cigarette.
So each of these spirits that are going to be destroyed are being given a cigarette.
Yeah, because of bad people, they die on the street. They die with a knife. You know, they die with a gun. You know, bad people, they die with the alcoholic. You know, the alcoholic to give again the things they use when
you
they
give to them the things which destroyed them.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yes. So before being got rid of, before the execution, as it were, they get a last cigarette. Is this lady feared in the village?
No, because that is like a doctor. Because 100 years ago, we don't know the doctor, you know. So people, they have to use that when somebody's sick. And so of course we have to be grateful with that woman, you know.
Yes. Is there a priest in this village?
Yes.
Does he approve of what she does?
Yes.
She is a Christian for him?
Yes. We believe both religion.
Yes.
Because this is a religion, we have the traditional.
You believe in both Christianity and in the traditional religion? I guess we have a bit of a bad conscience about this because that chicken was killed, I suppose, because we were there. It's strange, really, how one wants to prevent people from doing things like that. One becomes, in spite of oneself, a bit of an inquisitor. Here we are, reasonable people. Here you are doing something unreasonable. Stop it. What are we going to stop? Not a lot. We should continue to eat frozen chicken and enjoy various other things that we want to do with chickens. We just don't want you to do that. The fact of the matter is, I don't know whether people feel better after the therapy of chickens than they do after going to see their analysts. It's certainly cheaper to have the chicken treatment than the analytic.
Today's Mexicans may be advancing economically, but there's a strong movement back to their Aztec roots. These genially fundamentalist Aztecs call themselves Campesinos, peasants. What's folkloric in the open air is a little strange in a Mexico City living room. Soledad Ruiz, dressed as an Aztec in full fig, is slightly more, well, improbable. Her accountant friend Antonio Pina provided a suitably dressed interpreter of the world they both hold dear.
¿Qué significa esto?
Esta es una danza dedicada al dios mismo de la danza, que en nuestro país lleva el nombre de Huehuecoyotl. Hay toda una leyenda en torno a este ser que se supone que en tiempos muy antiguos fue un gran danzante y un buen día, danzando, se elevó. No, ahora sí que con todo y guaraches, porque estos no son zapatos.
Sí.
El atuendo. Entonces se le llamó pues el dios de la danza, pero se cuenta que fue un ser que realmente existió.
Pero usted, señor Piña, ¿es una danza cristiana o una danza pagana?
Bueno, es una danza prehispánica. Digo, ya la división entre cristiano y pagano puede denotar cierto menosprecio hacia lo pagano, ¿no? Y en México, pues lo característico es el sincretismo entre nuestras tradiciones prehispánicas y nuestras tradiciones cristianas.
Pues no hay una contradicción entre este tipo de danza y el cristianismo occidental.
Y yo veo ahora mucho interés, cosa que hace unos 25, 30 años realmente no existía, ¿no? Pero con esta caída de las ideologías, pues la gente de cualquier manera quiere tener algo en que creer, ¿eh?
Sí, pero creer es peligroso, ¿no es verdad? Porque los aztecos, evidentemente, creían mucho en sus dioses.
Sí.
Y por eso han matado enormemente de gente para sacrificarlos a estos dioses.
Bueno, yo creo que en todas las etapas de la historia y de las culturas hay un momento en que se producen los sacrificios humanos.
Sí.
Todas las matanzas en las guerras de religión entre protestantes y católicos eran sacrificios humanos. Todas las matanzas por cuestiones ideológicas, ya no digamos la que realizó el nazismo, pues evidentemente que fueron sacrificios humanos a una escala muy superior a la que nunca realizaron los...
¿no? Ustedes están así como muy asustados del sacrificio. ¿Qué sería la existencia misma, el universo, sino el resultado de un tremendo sacrificio? Yo, claro, me declaro cristiana, pero estoy muy imbuida de ideas prehispánicas que son, como usted decía, catalogadas como paganas y que yo no considero peyorativo. Es decir, de verdad, hay muchas ideas que corresponderían a ese periodo que siguen siendo valiosísimas, ¿no?
There's something about Mexico which makes one surprised to find death having its own space, because in the great Indian sites in Mexico City and here in Yucatan, you don't find any graveyards. In a sense, I think you could say that the dead were too useful to the ancient Aztecs and the ancient Mayans to be shunted off into a quiet and neglected corner like this one. What exactly have you learnt about life and death in Mexico? And what's God got to do with them? Well, I think God's really got a great deal to do with it, depending whether you're talking about that God, Christian God in the sky, or the gods of the Mexicans. In fact, they had a very similar morality in an extraordinary number of ways, including the idea of an afterlife. Death itself, however, was regarded somewhat differently. It was something which was owed to Mother Earth for the maize that one had eaten during one's life. One took from the ground and one went back to the ground. And the infant that dies, do you want to hear this? The infant that dies before it has a chance to eat has a second chance at life. A charming notion. Like so many religious notions, one would like to believe it, but I can't.
Nowhere in Mexico seems so divinely Mayan as Uxmal. Built around a great court that might grace an ancient university, this was actually a vast spiritual center. The Mayans were as cunning as the Greeks when it came to architecture. So much of what appears true is untrue. Doorways and windows appear symmetrical from a distance, only because they are asymmetrical. This roof appears straight because it's raised in the middle. Here, truth and falsehood depend on each other. And the same seems to me to be true of gods. What you see is seldom what you get.
The great thing about Uxmal is the wonderful use of space, the relationship of the buildings to each other, the use of space within the courtyard. All of this speaks of a society full of movement and excitement and a sense of community. Perhaps this community was almost exaggerated, because if one wants to understand what happened here, one has to understand that these people could only think the religion which they lived. Plato thought the society should be very much like this: the rulers, the warriors, the workers, all knowing their places, all subscribing to exactly the same values. And a great many religions have mimicked this: Islam, fundamental Judaism, and fundamental Christianity. It's admirable and it's horrible. It's horrible, it seems to me, because a society where nobody can think anything but what everybody else thinks is a society which is frozen in its own rituals and its own sacred spaces. I prefer a society which is elastic, which can bend, which has variety and oppositions in it. And I hope you do.